I just found out my estranged dad had another family. He left his business to his other kids, but expected me to pay for his funeral costs. Using a throwaway because this situation is so messed up that I can't risk anyone I know finding this post. I'm still processing everything that's happened in the past 2 weeks, and I genuinely don't know if I'm being reasonable or if grief is making me act like a terrible person. I, 29, am just lived through what feels like the plot of a soap opera, except it's my actual life and the emotional whiplash is very real. I need outside perspective because everyone in my family has an opinion, and they're all different. The background: a lifetime of disappointment. Let me start from the beginning. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old, but honestly, my dad was barely present even when they were married. He was always working late at his construction business, or traveling to job sites, or meeting with clients. Even on weekends, he'd get mysterious phone calls that would send him rushing out the door. My mom used to joke that she felt like a single parent even when she was married, but looking back, I don't think she was joking at all. After the divorce, the custody arrangement was supposed to be every other weekend and Wednesday nights. But my dad was wildly inconsistent. He'd show up 3 hours late to pick me up, or cancel at the last minute because of work emergencies. Sometimes he'd take me to McDonald's and spend the entire time on his phone with contractors or suppliers. Other times, he'd be overly enthusiastic, making grand promises about camping trips or fishing expeditions that never materialized. The worst part wasn't the broken promises. It was the way he'd act like we had this great relationship when other people were around. At family gatherings or school events he actually bothered to attend, he'd put on this performance of being a devoted dad. He'd ruffle my hair and talk about my boy and make plans we both knew he'd never follow through on. Then he'd disappear again for weeks at a time. As I got older, I started declining his invitations. Why get excited about plans that would just get canceled? Why pretend we had a relationship when we clearly didn't? By high school, our contact had dwindled to awkward phone calls every few months and generic birthday cards with a $50 bill tucked inside, like he could buy forgiveness for $600 a year. My mom never badmouthed him, which I appreciate now as an adult. She'd just say, "Your father has his own way of showing love," or "He's doing his best with what he knows." But I could see the strain on her face when he'd miss another event or show up drunk to my graduation. She was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat while he drove a brand new truck and talked about expanding his business. I went to college on scholarships and loans, worked through school, got my degree in accounting, and built a decent life for myself. I have a good job, a serious girlfriend, and I've been saving up to buy a house. I made peace with having a father who just wasn't interested in being a dad. Some people have absent fathers, some have dead fathers, some have abusive fathers. I had one who was physically alive but emotionally absent. It was what it was. The last time I spoke to my dad was about 8 months ago when he called to tell me he was thinking of retiring and selling the business. It was a 10-minute conversation where he talked about his back problems and complained about lazy employees. He asked how I was doing in that perfunctory way people ask when they don't actually want to know the answer. I told him I was fine. He said, "Good, good." And that was it. Classic dad conversation. The phone call that changed everything. 3 weeks ago, I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice said, "Is this my name? This is Sarah Martinez. I was your father's partner. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but your dad passed away yesterday." I honestly didn't know how to respond. Partner? I'd never heard of a Sarah Martinez. My first thought was that maybe it was someone from his business, but she said partner, not business partner. My second thought was confusion about why some random woman was calling me instead of my dad's family. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, because that seemed like the appropriate response. "How did you get my number?" "From his phone," she said, and I could hear that she'd been crying. "He had you listed as son, my name. The funeral is going to be Saturday at Meadowbrook Memorial. I hope you can come. I know you and your dad had your differences, but..." She trailed off, and I didn't know how to fill the silence. Differences? We didn't have differences. We just didn't have a relationship. "How did he die?" I asked. "Heart attack," she said. "Very sudden. He was at Tyler's baseball game and just collapsed." The paramedics said he was gone before they got there. Tyler? Who the hell was Tyler? I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused, I said. Who are you exactly? And who is Tyler? There was a long pause. I'm his partner. We've been together for 15 years. Tyler is your half-brother. He's 14. The world sort of tilted sideways. Half-brother? 15 years? I think there might be some mistake, I said. No mistake, she said softly. You have 3 half-siblings, actually. Emma is 16, Tyler is 14, and Lily just turned 12. Your dad, he told us about you, of course. He said you'd chosen not to have a relationship with him after your parents divorced. He said it broke his heart. I sat there at my desk, staring at my computer screen, trying to process this information. My dad had another family. Kids he'd been raising while I was growing up, wondering why my own father couldn't be bothered to show up for me. And he'd told them I was the one who cut contact? The funeral is Saturday at 2 p.m., Sarah continued. I really hope you'll come. The kids have always wondered about their big brother. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour, just trying to wrap my head around it. My girlfriend Emma, yes, same name as my apparently half-sister, which is going to be confusing, called me twice, but I couldn't even begin to explain what I'd learned. That night, I told Emma everything. She was as shocked as I was. 15 years, she kept saying. He had another family for 15 years while you were growing up? Apparently so. And he told them you were the one who didn't want a relationship? That's what she said. Emma is a social worker, so she deals with family dysfunction professionally, but even she seemed stunned. That's some next-level compartmentalization, she said. I mean, the logistics alone. How do you maintain 2 separate families for 15 years? I'd been wondering the same thing. All those work emergencies and job site visits. All those weekends he was too busy to see me. All those times he showed up late or canceled entirely. He wasn't working, he was with his other family. His real family, apparently. I debated whether to go to the funeral at all. Part of me wanted to just ignore it and move on with my life. But another part of me was curious about these half-siblings I'd never known existed. And I'll admit, part of me wanted to see what this other life of his looked like. The life he'd chosen over spending time with me. Meadowbrook Memorial is a nice funeral home, much nicer than the one we'd used for my grandmother 5 years ago. There were a lot of people there, which surprised me. My dad had always seemed like a loner, but apparently he had a whole community I knew nothing about. I recognized some of his siblings and cousins, people I hadn't seen since I was a kid. But in the front row was a woman with 3 kids who were clearly the family Sarah had told me about. The woman, Sarah, was probably in her early 40s, with dark hair and kind eyes that were red from crying. The kids were all obviously his. They had his nose and his stubborn chin. Emma, my half-sister, not my girlfriend, was tall for 16, with long brown hair and my dad's green eyes. Tyler looked exactly like my dad had in old photos, same build, same cowlick. Lily was tiny and blonde and kept wiping her nose with tissues. They were devastated, like truly, deeply grieving in a way that made my chest tight with something I couldn't identify. Anger? Jealousy? Sadness? During the service, people got up to talk about my dad. His business partner talked about what a reliable, hardworking guy he was. A neighbor talked about how he was always willing to help with home repairs or lend tools. Tyler's baseball coach talked about what a dedicated father he was, never missing games or practices. Never missing games or practices. I sat there listening to story after story about this man who sounded nothing like the father I'd known. This dad who coached Little League and helped with homework and took his family on camping trips to Yellowstone. This dad who apparently built a treehouse in his backyard and taught his son how to change oil in cars. Emma, half-sister, got up to speak, and I nearly lost it. She talked about how dad taught her to drive in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings, how he'd take her for ice cream after dance recitals, how he'd stay up late helping her with math homework because it was her worst subject. She talked about his terrible dad jokes and how he'd make elaborate pancake breakfasts on weekends. I'd never heard my dad tell a joke. He'd never helped me with homework. I'd taken driver's ed classes to learn to drive because he was always too busy. As she spoke, Emma, half-sister, kept looking over at me, like she was trying to include me in her memory somehow. At one point she said, Dad always talked about his oldest son and how proud he was, even though they didn't get to see each other much. Proud? Of what? He knew nothing about my life. After the service, Sarah approached me with the kids in tow. Up close, the family resemblance was unmistakable. These were definitely my siblings, which made the whole situation even more surreal. You must be my name, Sarah said. I'm so glad you came. Kids, this is your big brother. The kids stared at me with curiosity and something that might have been hope. Tyler stepped forward first. Dad said you're an accountant. That's cool. I'm really good at math too. Yeah, I said, because I had no idea what else to say. Are you going to come to the house? Lily asked. We're having people over after. Mom made Dad's favorite cookies. I looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. You're absolutely welcome. I think your dad would have liked that. I almost said no. The whole situation felt too weird, too painful. But something about the way the kids were looking at me, like they'd been waiting their whole lives to meet me, made me nod. The house, seeing his other life. The house was in a subdivision I'd driven through 100 times but never really noticed. It was a modest 2-story colonial with a well-maintained lawn and a basketball hoop in the driveway. There were family photos on the mantle, vacations I'd never been on, Christmases I'd never shared, birthdays I'd never attended. In the living room, there was a wall of framed school photos and certificates. Tyler's perfect attendance award, Emma's honor roll certificate, Lily's art project from 2nd grade, and in the middle, a photo of my dad in a suit and tie, beaming at the camera like the proud father he apparently was to them. What hit me hardest was how normal it all looked. This wasn't some secret second life of debauchery or crime. It was just a family. A regular, loving, functional family that my dad had built while simultaneously neglecting the son he already had. Sarah gave me a tour, and I felt like an anthropologist studying an alien culture. That's your dad's office, she said, pointing to a small room with a desk and filing cabinets. He did all the business paperwork in there. And this is the master bedroom. Sorry, it's a mess. I haven't had the energy to clean since. In Tyler's room, there were baseball trophies and posters of professional players. Dad coached my team for 3 years, Tyler told me proudly. We won the championship last season. Dad said he was going to frame the team photo, but in Emma's room, there were photos from dance recitals and school plays. Dad never missed a performance, she said. Even when he had big jobs going on, he'd always make time for my stuff. Lily's room was full of art supplies and half-finished craft projects. Dad and I were making a birdhouse, she said sadly. We're going to finish it this weekend. Each revelation was like a small knife in my chest. He'd made time for their activities, but not mine. He'd coached Tyler's baseball team, but never came to my games. He'd helped Emma with college applications, but never asked about my educational plans. In the kitchen, Sarah showed me the calendar on the refrigerator. It was packed with activities. Tyler's game 6 p.m., Emma's recital dress rehearsal, Lily's art class, family movie night. My dad's life had been full and busy, just not with me. He really did talk about you all the time, Sarah said, maybe sensing my discomfort. He was so proud that you'd made something of yourself without his help. He said you were stronger than he was at your age. Did he? I asked. When exactly did he say that? Sarah looked confused. Well, whenever your name came up, when we'd see something about accounting on TV, or when one of the kids asked about you. He always said his oldest son was brilliant and independent. But he never tried to contact me, never tried to be part of my life. He said you'd made it clear you didn't want that, Sarah said softly. After you stopped coming for visits, he said you decided you were better off without him. He respected your choice. My choice? I'd stopped coming for visits because he was constantly canceling them or showing up hours late or clearly wishing he was somewhere else. I'd stopped trying because he'd made it obvious that spending time with me was a chore for him. That's not how I remember it, I said. Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. Really? Because he always said He said you were angry about the divorce and blamed him, and that you told him you didn't want him in your life anymore. I never said any such thing. Even as an angry teenager, even when I'd stopped accepting his invitations, I never told him I didn't want him in my life. I just stopped trying to force a relationship that he clearly didn't want. 2 days after the funeral, Sarah called me to say the lawyer wanted to meet with the family to go over my dad's will. I almost declined. What business was it of mine? But Sarah insisted that I was specifically mentioned and needed to be there. The lawyer's office was in a nice building downtown. Sarah brought all 3 kids, and my dad's brother Uncle Mike was there too, along with a couple of other relatives I vaguely recognized. Everyone was dressed somberly and speaking in hushed tones. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was probably in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He expressed his condolences and explained that he'd been my father's attorney for the past 8 years, since Dad had started doing more serious estate planning. Your father was very specific about his wishes, Mr. Peterson said. He updated his will several times over the years, most recently about 3 years ago. He opened a folder and began reading. To Sarah Martinez, with whom I have shared 15 wonderful years, I leave my house at 847 Maple Street, along with all furnishings and household goods. You have been my partner, my companion, and the love of my life. I hope this provides security for you and the children we raised together. To my daughter Emma Martinez, I leave 1/3 of my business, Rodriguez Construction LLC, to be held in trust until your 25th birthday. You have always been my little star, and I know you'll shine in whatever you choose to do. To my son Tyler Martinez, I leave 1/3 of my business, Rodriguez Construction LLC, to be held in trust until your 25th birthday. Keep swinging for the fences, son. I'm proud of the man you're becoming. To my daughter Lily Martinez, I leave 1/3 of my business, Rodriguez Construction LLC, to be held in trust until your 25th birthday. Never stop creating beautiful things, my little artist. To Emma, Tyler, and Lily collectively, I leave my savings and investment accounts, currently valued at approximately $150,000, to fund your college educations. Education is the one thing no one can take away from you. The business was worth about $300,000, according to recent valuations. The savings and investments were another $150,000. Plus the house, which had to be worth at least $200,000 in the current market. So my dad had left close to $650,000 to his real family. And what about me? To my son, my name, I know our relationship has been complicated and distant for many years. I know you have chosen to build your life without me, and I respect that choice. You have grown into a strong, independent man, and I am proud of you from afar. However, I hope that in death, we might find the peace that eluded us in life. I ask that you handle my funeral arrangements and final expenses. I know this is a burden, but I believe it will give you closure and help you say goodbye properly. Sarah and the younger children are grieving and should not have to bear this responsibility during their time of sorrow. That was it. No money. No business share. No investments. Just the responsibility to pay for his funeral and the suggestion that this would somehow give me closure. The room was quiet except for Lily's sniffling. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Uncle Mike was frowning at the papers like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. What exactly does handle my funeral arrangements and final expenses mean? I asked. Mr. Peterson consulted his notes. Your father left detailed instructions about the type of service he wanted, which we followed. The outstanding bills from Meadowbrook Memorial come to $8,500. That includes the casket, service, burial plot, headstone, flowers, and reception costs. $8,500. He wanted me to pay $8,500 for a funeral for a man who'd left me nothing while giving his other children a business worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if I choose not to pay those expenses? Well, Mr. Peterson said carefully, funeral homes typically work with families on payment plans. Or the estate could be liquidated to cover debts before distribution, but that would mean selling assets that your father specifically intended for his other beneficiaries. So either I paid $8,500 out of my own pocket, or his real family would have to sacrifice part of their inheritance to cover his final expenses. Either way, I was being used as a tool to protect their financial interests. I need to think about this, I said. Over the next few days, I got calls from almost everyone who'd been at the will reading. Sarah called first. She was crying, which made me feel terrible. I don't understand, she sobbed. He always said you were successful, that you had a good job. $8,000, that's more than I make in 3 months. The kids are asking why their big brother won't help us. I don't know what to tell them. Uncle Mike called next. Look, kiddo, he said. He'd called me kiddo when I was 8, and apparently that was still my identity to him. I know your dad wasn't perfect. None of us are. But this is what families do. We take care of each other. $8,000 isn't going to break you, but it would destroy Sarah and those kids right now. My cousin Jennifer called. I heard about the situation, she said. I think Dad's being unreasonable expecting you to pay, but honestly, just pay it and wash your hands of the whole mess. It's not worth the family drama. Even my mom got involved, somehow. Apparently, Sarah had tracked down her number and called her directly. She seems like a nice woman, my mom said when she called me. And those children, they're your siblings, honey. They didn't ask for any of this. Neither did I pointed out. I know, Mom said. And I understand why you're angry. But sometimes being the bigger person means doing what's right even when it hurts. The kids started calling too. Emma, half-sister, called on Tuesday evening. I don't understand why you won't help us, she said, and I could tell she'd been crying. Dad always said you were his oldest and smartest kid. He said you were the responsible one. Tyler keeps asking if you hate us, and Lily thinks it's because she said something wrong at the funeral. I don't hate you, I said. This has nothing to do with you kids. Then why won't you help? Mom's been crying every night. She's trying to figure out how to pay for everything and take care of us, and I don't understand. We're family. Tyler called the next day. My coach says you should help because that's what family does, he said without preamble. He says when his dad died, all the kids chipped in for the funeral even though some of them didn't get along with him. It's complicated, Tyler. But we're your family. Dad always talked about his oldest son and how proud he was. He had your picture on his desk at work. Mr. Henderson said. He showed it to everyone. He had my picture on his desk? What picture? From when? What picture? I asked. Your graduation picture. From college. He had it in a frame next to our school pictures. He said you were the first person in the family to get a college degree. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd sent him a graduation announcement, not an invitation, just an announcement, when I'd finished college. I'd never heard back from him, so I'd assumed he hadn't cared. But he'd kept the photo on his desk for 5 years? Lily called on Thursday, and that nearly broke me. Are you mad at Daddy? She asked in her little 12-year-old voice. It's complicated, sweetheart. Mom says you might not help with Daddy's funeral money. But I don't understand. Don't you miss him? How do you explain to a 12-year-old that you can't miss someone who is never really there? That you can't grieve for a relationship that never existed? I miss the daddy I wish I'd had, I said, and immediately regretted being so honest with a child. But Daddy loved you, she said. He said so all the time. He said his oldest boy was so smart and strong, and that he was proud you didn't need him anymore. Didn't need him anymore? I'd never not needed him. I'd needed him when I was 8, and he stopped showing up for visits. I'd needed him when I was 12 and getting bullied at school. I'd needed him when I was 16 and trying to figure out how to be a man. I needed him when I was 22 and scared about starting my career. I hadn't stopped needing him. I just stopped believing he'd ever be there. While I was wrestling with guilt about the kids and pressure from the family, I decided to do what I do best, dig into the numbers. Something about the financial situation didn't add up. If my dad had built a business worth $300,000 and had $150,000 in savings, how is Sarah struggling so much financially? Even on a teacher's part-time salary, which I'd learned was her job, a household with that much wealth shouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck. I started asking some subtle questions. I called the office of Rodriguez Construction and spoke to his business partner, Jim Henderson. I'm calling about my father's affairs, I said. I'm trying to understand the business finances. Oh, you're David's oldest boy, Jim said. He talked about you all the time. Showed everyone your graduation picture. Said you were too smart to get into the construction business. Again with the graduation picture. It was becoming clear that my dad had maintained some kind of relationship with the idea of me, even if he'd never maintained a relationship with the actual me. Can you tell me about the business valuation? I asked. Well, we had it appraised last year when Dave started talking about succession planning. The company itself is worth about $300,000, but that doesn't include the outstanding contracts. We've got jobs lined up through next spring, probably another $150,000 in guaranteed revenue. So the business was potentially worth $450,000, not $300,000. Why wasn't that in the will? And the company assets? Equipment, trucks, inventory? Oh, probably another $100,000 in equipment alone. Dave was always big on having good tools and reliable trucks. More missing assets. I asked Jim about my dad's financial situation. Dave was always tight with money, Jim said. Smart about it, you know? He'd been socking away money for years talking about retirement. I figured he had quite a nest egg built up. But according to the will, he only had $150,000 in savings and investments. For a man who'd been running a successful business for 20 years and socking away money, that seemed low. I called the bank where my dad had his business accounts. As his son, I wasn't entitled to detailed information, but I could ask general questions about estate planning. I'm trying to understand my father's estate, I told the bank officer. There seemed to be some accounts not mentioned in the will. I can't give you specific information without proper authorization, she said, but I can tell you that your father had several accounts with us. Some personal, some business. If you're the executor of the estate. I'm not. His partner Sarah Martinez is handling everything. She said, and something in her tone made me pay attention. Yes, Ms. Martinez has been in several times since your father's passing. She's been very thorough in her review of the accounts. That was an interesting way to put it. I decided to go directly to Sarah. I called and asked if we could meet to discuss some questions I had about the estate. Of course, she said. I want everything to be transparent. Your father would have wanted that. We met at a coffee shop near her house. Sarah looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair that needed washing, clothes that looked like she'd been sleeping in them. I've been looking into my dad's finances, I said. I'm wondering about some discrepancies. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. What kind of discrepancies? Well, his business partner mentioned outstanding contracts worth about $150,000 that weren't included in the will valuation, and equipment and assets that might be worth another $100,000. I don't know anything about that, Sarah said quickly. The lawyer handled everything according to your father's will. And his savings accounts. Jim Henderson said my dad had been saving for retirement for years. Only $150,000 seems low for someone his age with his income. Sarah was definitely uncomfortable now. She kept fidgeting with her coffee cup and wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah, I said gently, I'm not trying to contest the will or take anything away from the kids. I just want to understand the full picture. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she started crying. He was supporting 2 households, she said finally. Do you know how expensive that is? Your mother and us and the business expenses. He was always stressed about money. Always juggling things. What do you mean, my mother? He wasn't paying her anything. She told me he was years behind on child support. Sarah looked stricken. That's not. He said he was sending her money every month. He said that's why we could never afford to take vacations, or why I had to work even though he wanted me to stay home with the kids. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. How much was he supposedly sending her? $800 a month. Sometimes more if she had emergencies. He said you were expensive, private school, college prep classes, sports equipment. He said your mom was determined to give you every opportunity even though it was a financial strain. I hadn't gone to private school. I'd gone to the same public high school as everyone else in our district. I hadn't taken college prep classes. I'd studied for the SATs with library books. I'd played exactly one sport, track, and I'd bought my own running shoes with money from my part-time job. Sarah, I said carefully, I think my dad might have been lying to you about sending money to my mother. She shook her head. No, that's not possible. I saw the checks. He wrote them every month. You saw him write checks? Well, I saw him write them out and put them in envelopes. He always mailed them himself because he said your mother was still bitter about the divorce and he didn't want to cause problems by having me involved. So he'd been writing checks every month, showing them to Sarah to prove he was supporting his first family. Then what? Not mailing them? Mailing empty envelopes? It was elaborate and cruel and completely insane. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. About 2 months before he died, he started acting strange. Secretive. He opened some new bank accounts and said it was for tax purposes, but he wouldn't let me see the statements. He said it was business stuff that I wouldn't understand. New accounts. At least 2 that I know of. Maybe more. He said he was restructuring his finances for retirement planning, but she trailed off. But what? But he seemed scared, like he was worried about something. He kept saying he needed to get his affairs in order and make sure everyone was taken care of. I thought he was just being responsible, but now it sounded like my dad had been hiding assets from his estate, possibly to avoid taxes, possibly to keep them away from creditors, or possibly to screw over the family members he resented, namely, me and my mother. Sarah, I said, I think you need to talk to a different lawyer. Not the one who read the will. Someone who specializes in estate fraud. Her eyes went wide. Estate fraud? But he was my partner. The father of my children. He wouldn't have, but even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping in. If he'd lied about sending money to my mother for 15 years, what else had he lied about? That conversation with Sarah opened floodgates. Over the next few days, she called me several times with new revelations. I found some papers in his office, she said during one call. Bank statements for accounts I didn't know about. There's at least another $80,000 in a savings account at a different bank. What did you do? I called the bank. The account is in his name only, so it should be part of the estate. But it's not mentioned in the will. More hidden assets. I was starting to see the scope of his deception. There's more, Sarah continued. I found receipts for things he claimed were business expenses. Dinners at expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, even jewelry receipts. Jewelry? A bracelet from last Christmas. He told me he couldn't afford to get me anything nice because business was slow. But he spent $800 on a bracelet for someone. The perfect father and faithful partner was looking less perfect by the day. Sarah, I said, I think you need to consider the possibility that my dad was living an even more complicated life than we thought. She was quiet for a moment. You mean another woman? I think the man we thought we knew didn't really exist. Over the next week, Sarah's investigation into my dad's hidden life revealed a pattern of deception that was breathtaking in its scope. He'd been maintaining multiple bank accounts, hiding business income, and apparently spending money on things and people that neither Sarah nor I knew about. The business was worth significantly more than the will indicated, closer to $500,000 once all assets were properly valued. He'd hidden at least $200,000 in various accounts. And yes, there was evidence of other relationships, restaurant charges, hotel bills, gifts that neither Sarah nor I had received. My father hadn't just abandoned me emotionally. He'd been systematically lying to and stealing from both of his families while maintaining an image as a devoted partner and father. But here's what really got to me. Even while he was deceiving Sarah about money and apparently cheating on her, he'd still been more of a father to her children than he'd ever been to me. He'd still coached Tyler's baseball team and attended Emma's recitals and helped Lily with art projects. His love for them might have been complicated by his other deceptions, but it was real in a way his relationship with me had never been. The final confrontation. Armed with this new information, I called a family meeting. Sarah, the kids, Uncle Mike, and my cousin Jennifer all came to Sarah's house on a Sunday afternoon. I've been doing some research into my father's estate. I began, and I've discovered some things that changed the situation significantly. I laid out everything I'd learned. The hidden accounts, the undervalued business, the evidence of other relationships, the fake child support payments. Uncle Mike was furious. "That son of a bitch," he said, then immediately apologized to the kids for swearing. "Sorry, but your father was apparently more of a liar than any of us knew." Emma, half-sister, looked confused. "But Dad was a good father to us. He was always there." "I'm not saying he wasn't," I said. "I'm saying he was living multiple lives and lying to everyone about everything." "So, what does this mean?" Sarah asked. "It means the estate is worth significantly more than the will indicates. It means there are assets that should be distributed according to state law, not according to his will. And it means—" I took a deep breath. "It means I'm not paying for his funeral." The room went silent. Lily started crying. Tyler looked angry. Emma just stared at me like I'd slapped her. "But we're family," Emma said finally. "Are we?" I asked, and I hated how bitter I sounded. Because for 29 years, I thought I had a father who just didn't care about me. Now I find out I had a father who actively chose to invest in other relationships while lying to everyone about it.
He told you I chose to cut contact.
He told Sarah he was supporting me financially. He told me through his actions that I wasn't worth his time. Which story is true? Any of them? None of them. "He loved you," Tyler said fiercely. "He talked about you all the time. He talked about an idea of me," I said. "He kept my graduation photo on his desk, but he didn't come to my graduation. He told people he was proud of me, but he never told me that. He built a narrative where he was the victim of an ungrateful son, but the reality is that he abandoned his responsibilities to his first family to focus on his second family, all while lying to both of us about it." Sarah was crying now too. "But the funeral costs can be paid from the hidden assets you're going to recover through proper legal channels," I said. "There's enough money hidden in his various accounts to cover the funeral 10 times over. You don't need me to pay for it. You never did." This was just one final manipulation, one last way for him to make me feel guilty and responsible for his choices. Uncle Mike was nodding slowly. "The kid's got a point, Sarah. If Dave was hiding money like this, you've got grounds to challenge the will distribution. Get a good lawyer." "But what about us?" Lily asked through her tears. "What about being a family?" That question nearly broke me. These kids were innocent in all of this. They genuinely loved their father, and he genuinely loved them back, even if that love had been built on a foundation of lies and deception. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'd like to get to know you all someday, when this mess is settled, and when you're old enough to understand that the situation is more complicated than anyone told you. But right now I need to protect myself from being used and manipulated, even by well-meaning people who are grieving." "You're abandoning us just like you abandoned Dad," Tyler said angrily. "I never abandoned Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He abandoned me. And then he spent 15 years telling you a story where I was the bad guy, so he didn't have to take responsibility for being a shitty father to his first kid." "Don't talk about our dad that way," Emma said. "He was my dad too," I said. "And he was a different person to me than he was to you. You got the version of him that coached baseball and attended recitals and helped with homework. I got the version that made promises he didn't keep and showed up 3 hours late and disappeared for months at a time. Both versions were real. Both versions were him. But the version I knew doesn't inspire me to open my wallet or my heart." After that confrontation, the calls and pressure tactics escalated. Uncle Mike supported my decision, but most of the extended family thought I was being cruel and unreasonable. My cousin Jennifer said I was punishing innocent children for their father's mistakes. My Aunt Carol said I was letting grief make me heartless. But the worst was when my mom called. "I talked to Sarah again," she said. "Those poor children are so confused and hurt, and Sarah is beside herself trying to figure out how to pay for everything." "Mom," I said, "there's more than enough money in hidden accounts to pay for the funeral. Sarah just needs to get a lawyer to help her recover it." "But that could take months. The funeral home wants payment now. Then Sarah can set up a payment plan or get a loan against the estate assets." This is not my problem to solve. When did you become so cold? My mom asked, and that hurt more than anything anyone else had said. When did protecting myself from being used become cold? I asked back. You raised me to be independent and self-sufficient because Dad wasn't reliable. Now you want me to bail out the family he chose over us. I want you to be the bigger person. I've been the bigger person for 20 years, Mom. I've been understanding about his absences, forgiving about his broken promises, patient about his lack of interest in my life. I've been the bigger person right up until the moment I discovered he was lying to everyone about everything while building a beautiful life with his replacement family. They're not his replacement family. They're your siblings. They're his do-over family, I said. His chance to be the father he never was to me. And good for him, he succeeded. By all accounts, he was a wonderful father to them. But that doesn't erase the fact that he was a terrible father to me, and it doesn't obligate me to subsidize his final performance of being a good family man. The pressure continued for weeks. Sarah called, crying. The kids called, asking why I hated them. Extended family members called to lecture me about duty and forgiveness. Even people who barely knew me, neighbors, family friends, acquaintances, somehow heard about the situation and felt entitled to share their opinions. You only get one father, said my barber, who'd apparently heard the story through some family connection. You're right, I said. And mine chose to spend his time and energy on other people. The worst part was the social media campaign. Emma, half-sister, posted on Facebook about how her big brother was refusing to help with their father's funeral expenses. She didn't include context about the hidden assets or the lies or the complicated history, just the basic facts that made me look like a monster. The post got dozens of comments from people who didn't know the full story but felt qualified to judge my character based on a one-sided account from a grieving 16-year-old. Family is everything. Money isn't worth losing relationships over. I can't imagine being so heartless toward my own siblings. This is what's wrong with society today. Everyone's too selfish to take care of each other. I wanted to respond, to tell my side of the story, to explain the decades of abandonment and the recent revelations about hidden assets and systematic deception. But what was the point? Most people prefer simple narratives where someone is clearly good and someone is clearly bad. The truth, that my father was a complex person who'd been a loving father to some children while being an absent father to another, and who'd been systematically lying to everyone while hiding assets, was too complicated for social media soundbites. The legal resolution. Sarah did eventually hire a lawyer specializing in estate issues, and within a month, they'd uncovered over $300,000 in hidden assets. Bank accounts, business assets that had been undervalued, and even a small investment property that wasn't mentioned in the will. The funeral expenses were paid from the estate, as they should have been from the beginning. Sarah and the kids ended up inheriting significantly more than the original will indicated, once all assets were properly accounted for. But by then, the damage to our potential relationship was done. The kids saw me as the brother who'd refused to help when they needed it most. Sarah saw me as the son who'd been cold and calculating during their time of grief. Extended family members saw me as the ungrateful child who dishonored his father's memory. None of them wanted to hear about the decades of emotional abandonment or the systematic deception or the financial manipulation. Those were complications that got in the way of their preferred narrative, where I was simply selfish and heartless. It's been 6 months since my father died, and I'm still processing everything that happened. I've been seeing a therapist, which has helped me work through the complicated grief of losing a parent I never really had while discovering that his other relationships were built on lies too. Here's what I've learned. My father was a complex person who was capable of being a loving, devoted parent, just not to me. His relationship with Sarah and the younger kids was real and meaningful, even though it was built on a foundation of deception about other aspects of his life. My decision not to pay for his funeral wasn't about the money. It was about refusing to be used one final time by someone who'd spent my entire life treating me as an afterthought while presenting himself as a victim of my supposed rejection. The kids' anger and disappointment are understandable, but they're also based on an incomplete understanding of the situation. They're grieving the loss of a father who was genuinely present and loving in their lives. I'm grieving the father I never had, and the realization that his absence wasn't about his inability to be a good parent. It was about his choice not to be one to me. Sarah's financial struggles were real, but they weren't my responsibility to solve, especially when there were adequate assets in the estate to cover all expenses once proper legal action was taken. The extended family's pressure was about maintaining their preferred version of reality, where family obligations trump personal boundaries and forgiveness means accepting mistreatment without consequences. Current status and final thoughts. I haven't heard from Sarah or the kids in 3 months. According to my Uncle Mike, they're doing well financially now that the estate has been properly settled. Emma started college this fall. Tyler is still playing baseball. Lily is still making art. Part of me is sad that we couldn't build some kind of relationship, but I also recognize that it would have been impossible under the circumstances. They needed me to be the grateful, forgiving big brother who was just happy to finally meet his siblings. I needed them to understand that I wasn't rejecting them personally. I was rejecting the role I'd been assigned in my father's final manipulation. Maybe someday, when they're older and have had time to process their own relationships with their father, we can have conversations about what really happened. Maybe they'll come to understand that the man who coached Tyler's baseball games was the same man who missed every single one of mine, and that both experiences were equally real and valid. Or maybe not. Maybe this is just how our story ends, with a family that could have been but wasn't, because our father's choices created wounds that were too deep to heal in the midst of grief and financial stress. I don't regret my decision. Every time I think about it, I come to the same conclusion. Paying for that funeral wouldn't have honored my father or brought us closer as a family. It would have been one final performance in his decades-long show where he was the put-upon father dealing with an ungrateful son. Instead, by refusing, I forced everyone to confront the reality of who he actually was and what he'd actually done. That's not comfortable or easy, but it's honest. And after 29 years of living with his version of reality, where I was somehow to blame for our lack of relationship, I needed to choose honesty over comfort. So, Reddit, AITA, for refusing to pay for my estranged father's funeral after discovering his secret family and his pattern of deception? I know how it looks from the outside. I know I seem like the cold, heartless son who couldn't find it in his heart to help his grieving siblings during their time of need. But I also know that sometimes protecting yourself from manipulation looks like selfishness to people who don't have the full context. I'm at peace with my choice, even though it costs me the possibility of relationships with my half-siblings. Sometimes the price of maintaining your integrity is losing people who matter to you. But I'd rather be alone and honest than connected and complicit in perpetuating lies. My father spent my entire life teaching me that I couldn't count on him to be there when I needed him. In the end, I decided to return the favor. Update 1. Holy shit, this blew up. I'm trying to read all the comments, but there are hundreds. A few things I want to clarify. Yes, I have all the documentation about the hidden assets. My therapist suggested I keep detailed records, so I have bank statements, business valuations, lawyer correspondence, everything. Several people asked about my relationship with my mom. She eventually apologized for pressuring me to pay. Once she learned about the hidden assets and the fake child support payments, she understood why I was so angry. She said she'd always wondered why he claimed to be sending money when she never received it, but she'd assumed it was just another lie he told to avoid responsibility. The kids did eventually learn about some of their father's deceptions, but according to my uncle, Sarah tried to shield them from the worst of it. They know there were financial irregularities, but not the full extent of his lies. I'm not interested in contesting the will or claiming any portion of the estate. I don't want his money. I just didn't want his debts. Update 2. Emma, half-sister, reached out to me last week. She's now 17 and apparently found this post somehow. She said she wanted to apologize for the Facebook post and for not understanding the situation better at the time. She asked if we could talk, and I said yes, but only if she was prepared to hear some difficult truths about her father. She said she was ready. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything. The missed visits, the broken promises, the years of feeling like I wasn't worth his time, and the discoveries about his hidden assets and lies. She cried a lot, but she listened. She told me that after the estate was settled, She started asking more questions about why her father had been so secretive about money. Sarah eventually told her about the fake child support payments and some of the other lies. Emma said it made her question everything she thought she knew about her father. He was still a good dad to us, she said. But now I understand he was a terrible dad to you, and that's not your fault. She asked if I would be willing to have a relationship with her and Tyler and Lily, separate from all the drama about the funeral and the estate. I said I'd think about it. I don't know where this goes from here. The damage from that initial confrontation might be too deep to overcome. But for the first time since this whole mess started, I feel like someone from that family actually sees me as a real person with valid feelings, not just as an obstacle to their preferred narrative. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's how healing starts, not with grand gestures or financial sacrifices, but with someone finally saying, I understand why you made the choice you made, and I don't blame you for it. We'll see.